Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Show. I can even say morning show because it is in the morning in the States. I hope you guys are happy this morning and everything is going okay with everyone. Thank you for joining me. Anybody, this is an off hour, but I'm joined and I'm happy to be joined with Professor Mohammad Marandi. He is Professor of English Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. He is somebody I consider to be a damn good friend of the show and has given incisive commentary and explanation of what has been taking place in regards to this conflict that we've been discussing for the last several months. Professor, thank you for joining me, man. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm very good. Thank you for your very kind words. It's always a honor and a pleasure being on the show.
Trust me, I wouldn't say it if it wasn't true. Like my mom knows me well enough, when she thinks this is a brutal part of my personality. On the positive side, when it's true, I have no issue in saying it. Um, I think, and I want to get your take on this as we step into this conversation, that we are at a crisis point. So apparently, Witkoff has given his first written proposal, which is amazing, right? They've had all of these negotiations, and this is the first written proposal that Witkoff has submitted. Um, we don't know what that proposal is. We do know that for the last several months that there's been an impasse between the United States and Iran. We do know that many people in the Trump administration, Zionists, neocons, lunatics, whack jobs, etc., not to mention working with Israel, has been agitating for war, or at the very least for the U.S. to fight a war on behalf of Israel. We do know that for the longest part, even going into the Saudi Arabia meeting that Trump went into, that Trump kept escalating his demands. That what started off as a conversation specifically about the amount of enrichment ended up being we need a Libyan model. We need Iran to stop working with resistance groups in the region, even though the U.S. could work with any terrorists that it wants in the region, even shaking Jelani's hand, who is literally an ISIS whack job. So we are somewhat in the dark. Even in the US, we don't know what is in that proposal that Witkoff submitted. But if we're going with the things that Witkoff has said prior, that they need a Libyan model, that this idea of Iranian enrichment continuing is off the table, and to add in the IAEA just releasing this report saying that Iran has increased the amount of enrichment over the course of the last several months to a point that apparently breaches what did they call it? Oh, it'll come to me in a moment. But breaches the non-proliferation. That's it.
For
Non-proliferation. Thank you.
proliferation.
Thank you
Now
very
I
much. For
can
some
say it.
reason, the word doesn't
Thank
want to
you,
come out.
because now I can't say it anymore.
Give me your take on this. Do you see this as a crisis point also? How do you view it?
Well, the hypocrisy of the United States, I think, is well known to your audience. There's no need for me to go on about that. I just would like to point out something that you know, and that is that I just came back from Venezuela uh, late last night. And it's quite stunning how the United States is strangling Cuba and how it's making Venezuelans suffer. But it's removed all sanctions from Al Qaeda and ISIS run Syria.
Yep.
So Cuba is a threat to US national security somehow. Venezuela is about to invade and destroy the United States as we know it. And but Syria is good. There, everything is good.
Yep.
That I think says enough about hypocrisy, and it says a lot about those who were naive to believe that the dirty war in Syria was about freedom and democracy, and that it wasn't about the United States and the Israeli regime trying to destroy Syria, crush Syria, in order to make the Israeli regime more powerful and more in control of the region around it. So when it comes to Iran, that the same model is the same model it can be used, or it can be understood within the same framework, in the same model, and that is that Iran cannot be strong because Iran opposes genocide. Iran opposes ethno-supremacism.
Right.
Iran opposes ethnic cleansing. And so Iran must be weakened. Now, if we look at it from that framework, all US sanctions against Iran are about Israel. They're not about the nuclear program. They're not about human rights. I mean, ISIS and Al Qaeda, human rights, Gaza, human rights. So it's not about human rights. It's not about Iran's nuclear capabilities. It's not about terrorism. It's all about Israel. So the nuclear program is one good excuse that the Americans can use to demonize Iran, that Iran is a threat to the world. Of course, on the one hand, we're constantly always hearing from the United States and the media in the United States, the mainstream media, that Iran is falling apart, Iran is bankrupt, the regime, as they like to call it, is barely standing, and all we have to do is just give a little push or wait a bit, but simultaneously it's a threat. It's a growing threat to the world. I don't know how these two can be these two narratives can work simultaneously, but in the West everything is possible.
Yeah.
So the nuclear program has to be looked at within this framework. Iran, within the framework of international law, can do as it is doing right now. It can enrich uranium as much as it wants, and it can enrich uranium at whatever percentage it wants. It can enrich uranium at 99.99%. In fact, Iran's experimental reactor, the experimental reactor in the city of Tehran, which is a 10-minute walk from my campus.
Is it?
It used to use enriched uranium at, I think, 97, 98% enrichment. And that fuel was, I think, would be exported to Iran. This was before the revolution. Then they were able to change it so that it could use enriched uranium at 20%. So right now, cancer patients are benefiting from the Iranian peaceful nuclear program, which is using enriched uranium at 20%. And it is being used in all areas, in different areas of industry, agriculture, medicine. But this is not something that the United States will tell you. It's not something that the Western media will tell you. And it's not something that the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is very deeply influenced by the West,
Yes.
will willingly tell you. So the United States has already negotiated with Iran 10 years ago under Obama a nuclear deal called the JCPOA. Now, the deal had many problems, and the problems really were for the Iranians. The Iranians were the ones that had the problems. Trump, when he said it was deeply flawed, he was talking nonsense. It was not flawed for the United States. It was flawed for Iran because Obama violated the deal and Iran abided by the deal. And Iran did not really benefit that much from the nuclear deal. Yet it shut down a very big part of the nuclear program. So that deal was torn up by Trump. And Trump refused to create any environment for Iran and the United States to be able to negotiate during his first term. He murdered General Soleimani, the person who led the fight against ISIS and Al Qaeda. Trump always likes to say that he defeated ISIS and Al Qaeda. That's nonsense. It was Iran and General Soleimani. So he murdered General Soleimani. he tore up a deal, a nuclear deal that the United States was benefiting from mostly. But in any case, it just showed the Iranians that you cannot negotiate with him because he's untrustworthy.
Right.
And his presidency ended with a terrible relationship existing between Iran and the United States. So now he comes to power again, and he's starting from where he left off. He says pretty words one day, the next day he threatens you with death. He's like a mafia boss. One day he says, you have a very beautiful shop. The next day he says, it will be too bad if something happens to it.
Right.
That's so. This is the person that the Iranians are dealing with. On the other hand, the Iranians look at the trade war. They see that the United States says one thing one day, and then the next day he backs down, and the next day he does something different again. With regards to Ukraine, he said he's going to end the war. Now he's sounding more like Biden. 4 months ago or 3 months ago, anyone who listened to Kellogg would think that he's just talking for himself. Now it seems like Kellogg is indeed talking on behalf of, or increasingly it seems he's talking on behalf of Trump.
Yeah.
So he's constantly shifting and changing. And then you have Gaza. The United States engineered a ceasefire. It was Trump's ceasefire. Witkoff was behind it. And then a couple of weeks later, he says all Palestinians must be expelled from their homes and their land. Something that no one has ever said before, outside, of course, Israel. Then he goes on and restarts the genocide because the genocide, the Holocaust in Gaza, cannot be carried out without U.S. permission. And we just saw what happened this morning. The mass murder of Palestinians being gunned down at the U.S. so-called aid center or the aid points. It's this is the United States that Iran is dealing with. So how can Iran negotiate with Trump? How is it possible? He's constantly changing his position. He is constantly flip-flopping. He ignores his own commitments, the ceasefire in Gaza. So how can you negotiate with him? And if you do negotiate with him and somehow you come to some sort of deal, what's to say that he's not going to tear up the deal 2 days afterwards or 2 weeks afterwards? So it's his deal, but then he decides that he doesn't like it anymore. And then you wake up and on Truth Social, you see a new statement by Trump saying, no, I don't like that deal. So Iran is basically dealing with an unstable regime in Washington that is demanding something from Iran that Iran cannot give and will not give. And that is the country's sovereignty.
Right.
Iran will not give up its sovereignty. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran has certain rights. Iran is not going to give up those rights because that means that you're no longer sovereign. It's like you giving up a piece of your territory. So this is where we are. And Witkoff, of course, is increasingly showing himself to be no different than anyone else. There was an attempt early on to make him look like some good guy that wants to negotiate and find solutions. He has helped exactly. He's right now part of the Holocaust in Gaza. There was an agreement, his proposal. Hamas accepted it, and the Israeli regime rejected it. And then he went and changed it for the sake of Netanyahu, and then he condemns Hamas. If you recall, this is exactly what happened with Biden too.
Yeah.
when Hamas and the resistance accepted the ceasefire proposal back then, and Israel rejected it, and the U.S. Secretary of State back then constantly said it's Hamas who's rejecting it. So this is just so there's no real difference between Witkoff, Trump, and Biden when it comes to Gaza. So Witkoff has shown himself to be genocidal. He's shown himself to be dishonest. He's constantly moving the goalposts. We see that in the case of Russia, Witkoff has failed to do anything of any significance. So now Witkoff, when dealing with Iran, how he's saying that Iran cannot have nuclear enrichment, whereas, regardless of the fact that that's Iran's rights, that's Iran's right according to international law, but he said earlier on that the only issue was a nuclear weapon, and that enrichment for civilian purposes, he meant energy, to produce energy, because it can also be, as I said, you can enrich uranium in Iran at 20%. It's used for civilian purposes too, for the medical industry, for agriculture, for business, for industry. But he said that Iran can enrich uranium at a lower percentage. But I guess, so what does Iran? So how does Iran deal with Witkoff? One day he says one thing, the next day he says this something else. So Witkoff is just like Trump. He's unreliable. He's moving the goalposts, and what he's done in Gaza is horrific. He's helped Netanyahu continue the genocide.
I guess, I mean, that's more of a question for Iran, right? Like, your point is completely valid. In fact, it was going to be a question that I was going to ask, frankly. If Witkoff, meaning if it's understood that anything that Witkoff does, especially if it's involving Israel, he will blame the opposition, regardless of what it is. So in the Gaza thing, you make a really good point. Recently, I think it was only a couple of days ago, Witkoff produces a deal, Hamas agrees to the deal, Israel changes the deal, Witkoff turns around and blames Hamas. They do it again, Israel turns around and blames Hamas. And then puts in a provision that ensures that Hamas stays in government, even though Hamas tried to put in this kind of civilian leadership of it. And Israel kept putting it in multiple times with this understanding that Israel wants an excuse to continue the genocide. Like, meaning, how does Iran deal with an unstable factor when there's no honesty, credibility built into any of this process? Any deal that they make isn't, for one thing, this has nothing to do with nukes, as you pointed out in the very beginning. This has nothing to do with nukes. This has nothing to do with nuclear power. This has everything to do with weakening Iran for Israel. Full stop. The New York Times and Western media can go with that nonsense. But the reality of it is, and everybody who's been paying attention knows full well that this has nothing to do with nukes. Israel has like 100 nukes that it could end the world with tomorrow. It's an unstable country that is full of lunatics. And yet that is not something that the US cares about. That is not something the Western media cares about. So this is not about nukes. How can Iran, and why are they engaging into these negotiations? Is it just to show the world that, hey, we're reasonable, we're open to it, even though they full well know that this is most likely going to end up in some kind of conflict, especially if they're at loggerheads with the US on this?
Yes, I think that's half of it at least. I think the Iranians are negotiating to see if we can have a deal, to see if there's a possibility for a deal.
Yeah.
If the United States decides to act reasonably, then we can have a deal. It's not far-fetched. It's actually quite easy to reach a deal. This is the nuclear issue has been negotiated for so many years between Iran and the United States that it's quite easy to to go over all the issues that they've gone over before and to find answers. It's actually very easy to find a solution that would be acceptable to Iran, and which, if the United States was sincere about nuclear weapons, it would be satisfactory to the United States. Very easy, actually. Alongside that, though, is the skepticism that Iran has, because every time we've had a deal with the United States, and it's not just a nuclear deal, any deal that we've ever had with the United States in the past, the United States violated. Every single one, always. And I can go over quite a number of them, but it'll take a few minutes. So, and I've said it out before. Maybe
Yeah.
I've even said it on your show. I don't know. But we've had numerous deals since the 1980s, and the United States always ignored them when it could. And I think it has a lot to do with the U.S. exceptionalism. The United States thinks that it has special privileges. Everyone must abide by their commitments, but the United States will abide by its commitments if it deems it necessary.
Right.
So, Iran is skeptical. And with Trump, Iran is exceptionally skeptical. But as you pointed out, the Iranians want to show the international community that we tried. If we can't have a deal, if the United States is not ready for a deal, then the Iranians want to show everyone, its friends especially, that it wasn't our fault. We did our best. We went to the negotiating table. We spoke. We gave them our position. We were willing to be flexible. But when it comes to our fundamental rights as a sovereign country, we will not submit to U.S. demands. And that is an effective, I think, policy. I think that's the smart way to do things. If you can have a deal, great. If you can't have a deal, show everyone whose fault it is. And with Trump, it's very easy, because across the world, there's a huge amount of dislike and skepticism towards the United States, especially after Gaza, especially over the last 20 months, and Trump in particular, for a host of reasons that you know as well as I. So he's not inside the United States. That's a different matter. But outside of the United States, he's not a popular person. Maybe in some places, but in general, no. So that is an effective tool that Iran has. But alongside that, I have no doubt that Iran is preparing itself for conflict. And although, as I have said before, I don't believe there will be war, in the sense that the United States will try to invade Iran and send in, because if they want to do that, they'd have to bring in like 1.5 million soldiers. They just don't have the resources. They don't have the men. They don't have the ability to wage a war against Iran. It would just destroy everything. And the global economy aside, the U.S. just doesn't have that capability. But it could lead to the United States carrying out strikes, airstrikes against Iran, or missile strikes against Iran. And Iran is preparing itself. Iran is preparing itself for all scenarios, including war, which I find, as I said, which I think is unlikely, but it's preparing itself. Now, many believe that, and there's evidence for that, as stated by the U.S. Secretary of Defense, that the United States attacked Yemen to prepare the ground for some sort of military action against Iran, and to also show America, the power of the United States, to intimidate Iran. But how did that go? The New York Times said that the United States wasted $7 billion in Yemen. And I think that does not include the F-18s that somehow fell into the Red Sea and the drones. So if you include all that, it could go up to, I think, if they're not included, it could go up to $10 billion for just a month or so of airstrikes, which killed many civilians, but didn't do any real damage to Yemen's military, as was admitted by the Wall Street Journal, I think.
Right.
So if that's the case with Yemen, how in the world does the United States think it's going to succeed with Iran, which is infinitely more powerful than Yemen? The resources that Iran has are infinitely greater. Iran, if Yemen has a number of underground missile and drone sites, Iran has hundreds of them. If in those sites Yemen has a certain amount, if in each of those sites Yemen has a certain amount of drones and missiles, Iran has in each site 10, 100 times more. If the Yemeni drones and missiles are advanced, Iranian missiles and drones are more advanced. How is the United States going to deal with Iran? And then, of course, with U.S. bases in all these tiny family dictatorship regimes in the Persian Gulf, what would happen to those regimes if there's war, there's major conflict?
I'm glad you
And
mentioned that.
what would happen to the oil market and the gas market? It would bring down the global economy. But
I'm glad you
Israel
mentioned that.
is more than willing. Israel is more than willing to sacrifice the global economy. It's more than willing to sacrifice Americans, more than willing to sacrifice the American people. And many US leaders are more than willing to sacrifice Americans for the sake of Israel. And it's not very strange to believe. We saw in Ukraine how European leaders sacrifice Europe for Washington's policies.
Yeah.
They sacrificed their own people for the sake of the United States. German politicians, in particular, sacrificed their country for the sake of the United States. So this is something that apparently it has become fashionable in the West. So there are many in the United States that are more than willing to sacrifice the interests of people across the world, but Americans in particular, for the sake of an ethno-supremacist genocidal regime, which claims, well, which claims that they are a chosen people, and who Christian Zionists claim are a chosen people, and Christian Zionists also claim that Christ supports the genocide that they're carrying out.
Yeah. Yeah. God is now pro genocide now that his chosen people are going through effectuating one. I'm glad you bring up Saudi Arabia, the quizzling
But
governments.
just before you continue, and I know your audience is very politically aware. I'm not, but I just don't. I just want to always remind people, because there is always this danger of some people going too far. And all of your viewers and myself and yourself must always remember that some of the most steadfast opponents of this notion of a chosen people and this ethno-supremacism
Our
uh,
church.
are Jews.
Yep.
And some of them are friends of mine and friends of yours and friends of the audience. And some of them are well known, some of them not so well known, some of them have been punished by their universities.
Yep.
So we're talking about Zionism, and most Zionists are not Jews. Most Zionists are Christian Zionists. So we have to, and many Zionists are secular. So, and many Muslims have been supporting Zionism. Many Muslims have supported ISIS and Al Qaeda in Syria alongside the Israeli regime. They helped destroy Syria uh, alongside the empire and in coordination with the Israeli regime. Country, Erdogan, Qatar, uh, dictators across the region, many fanatics uh, in our region. Uh, they, it's this is not an issue about any particular religion.
Mm.
You have Christians opposed to genocide. You have Christians who oppose genocide. You have Jews who support genocide. You have Muslims who support genocide, Muslims who oppose genocide. But in any case, we are living in a world where Western regimes are controlled by neocons, Zionists who support genocide, and their tools have been ISIS and Al Qaeda, which are creations of uh, Western intelligence agencies and their regional proxies and clients. Uh, on the one hand, they created these terrorist groups, and on the other hand, they've been promoting Zionism and supporting Zionism, and have been carrying out the most the most disturbing the most
sadistic.
disturbing crime in human history in a way, because we've had bigger crimes in history, but never has it been carried out in front of a global audience for 20 months, day and night.
Yeah, this is different. This is
This is
fundamentally
different.
different. It's different. And I'm glad you're making the distinction between a religion versus a political entity. It's Zionism is a political movement, not a religious movement. They may code it in this kind of religious stuff, but it's a political movement.
I
I'm
mean, you
glad you bring
saw
it.
that
Oh, go ahead. No, no.
she was, I think, Hindu. So you
Mhm.
have, I think she was Hindu, Indian American. I'm pretty sure she was Hindu. Your viewers could correct me if I'm wrong. But so you have Hindu fanatics in India who support genocide, but you have this young lady at MIT courageously standing up against it, genocide.
And
And
being punished
her,
for it, by the
being
way.
at MIT,
Yeah,
she's worked very hard to get where she is, and I'm sure she will pay a price
she is.
for those statements.
She is. She is. And that tells you where you are, right? When you point out,
Exactly.
hey, you guys are slaughtering people, you're burning kids alive. And the response is, yeah, yeah, shut up about that. Then we're going to punish you for saying something about it. By the way, I'm glad you bring in Saudi Arabia to this and some of these governments in the Gulf. And I guess this leads into two questions. One of the things that the New York Times was reporting, and I have no reason to believe that they're wrong on this one, I think they're completely right, is that Israel wants to sabotage, and I'm putting it in quotes, sabotage, negotiations between the US and Iran. That Donald Trump, at the very least openly, is saying, well, yeah, I told them don't do strikes because I'm trying to get a deal. Now, again, I'm putting sabotage in quotes because I don't believe that Israel is a rogue actor. I think the US knows exactly what it's doing with Israel being its attack dog and potentially hitting Iran, with the US trying to pretend as if it has nothing to do with those strikes. But what the New York Times points out is that what Israel believes is that if it hits Iran, that the US will come to its protection, just like Witkoff comes to its protection when it blows off a deal with Hamas. So the US comes to with the deal with Hamas, Israel changes it, blows it off, and Witkoff attacks Hamas. And they believe the same mechanism would work for Iran. The US and Iran come to some kind of deal, Israel attacks Iran, Iran responds overwhelmingly, and the US attacks Iran. Meaning there can never be an honest arbiter in this because the US is not an honest arbiter. It's not an arbiter at all. It is on decisively one very specific side. And I would even go so far as to say controlling, or at the very least, in line with that side. How does Iran see this? I mean, do they look at Israel as being a rogue actor, or do they look at Israel as being under the thumb or under the influence, or at the very least on the same page with the US? Because that's a big deal. Like if Israel is saying, we will attack, and the attack is imminent, and the US is acting as if, well, we don't want this to take place. Okay, well, if Iran believes that Israel is a rogue actor, then it may accept this idea that Israel is acting on its own. If Iran does not believe that Israel is a rogue actor, then it doesn't matter what the US is saying. Any attack that takes place by Israel is understood to be in agreement with the US and the United States, if not pushed by the US to do so. How does Iran see Israel? A rogue actor or under the thumb or influence of the United States?
Well, I think we can answer the question by answering a couple of other questions. Was Trump able, if he wanted to, would he have been able to stop the war in Ukraine? Would he have been able to end the war in Ukraine?
He just
Yes.
walked. Yeah.
Did he do that? No. After he met Zelensky in the White House, could he have ended it again? Could he have again ended the war in Ukraine? Yes. Did he do so? No. Where is the war now? It's intensifying. And we've
Mm-hmm.
seen Ukrainians strike inside Russia, and then you're going to see a Russian response. Where does the United States stand on all this? Have they ended supporting Ukraine? Trump is not mediating between Ukraine and Russia. Trump or the United States is behind Ukraine.
Yes.
Now, either Trump is behind Ukraine and he really is just talking nonsense with the Russians, or he's a weak leader. I tend to think that he's a weak leader who's easily influenced. That's what I think. I don't know what goes on in the White House, of course, and so I'm just speculating. But I feel that he's a weak leader and that he's easily persuaded. Let's look at Gaza. You explained it perfectly. One day there's a ceasefire. The next day Trump says they have to go. Again, later on, after 3 more months of genocide and Holocaust, there's another ceasefire. Hamas agrees. Then Israel says no, and Witkoff changes the deal to some, terribly one-sided deal, and then blames Hamas. So this is how the United States negotiates. This is a sign of a weak president. And of course, we have to keep in mind that Witkoff is himself a Zionist.
Mm-hmm.
He's a friend of Netanyahu. He's a friend of the Israeli regime. He supports these genocidal maniacs. But that aside, his negotiations tell us a lot about Trump. So he brings forward a deal. Definitely it had Trump's approval. Then Hamas says okay, and Israel says no, and he just changes it completely into some sort of lopsided, ridiculous set of demands being made on the Palestinian people who are the victims of genocide. So how is Iran supposed to react? How is Iran supposed to interpret all this? I think it's fair to say that the United States, the Zionist lobby, the neocons in the United States are very powerful. And Trump has surrounded himself with these people, and he's indebted to these people as well. They brought him into power.
Yeah.
Now, does Trump want a war? I doubt it, because I think he knows what will happen. You recall Tucker Carlson's tweet saying that if the United States engages in war with Iran, thousands of Americans would die and the United States would lose. Does Tucker Carlson just say it? Is he just saying that? No, he's the most well-connected journalist in the United States. I'm sure you would have no doubt that people in the know told him that. And he made that statement as a warning to put pressure on those who want to push the United States towards a destructive war. Mm-hmm. If Tucker Carlson knows that, do you think that Trump doesn't know that? Of course he knows it. But I think Trump is a weak leader, easily persuaded. And who's in the best position to persuade him? The neocons and the Zionist lobby
that are around him. Yeah.
Does that mean that military conflict is inevitable? No, but I think that Iran is preparing itself for a fight, and Iran is determined that it will not be on the losing end of a potential fight.
Yeah. So just to be clear, though, I think it's just to get to your point. It doesn't really matter whether Israel is a rogue actor or not. That there are so many people that are surrounding Trump that him being a weak leader, it makes it almost irrelevant of whether it's a rogue actor or whether it's working in coordination with the US. There's so many people around Trump that is effectively almost one entity. They are fused. It's not separate and distinct. US interests and Israeli interests at this point, because of the people who are around Trump, have become one.
Jamal, the United States under Trump said he's going to end the war in 24 hours. Where are we now? Trump said when he imposed the tariffs, he said there's no going back. And then when the bond market went into crisis mode, he backed down immediately. Just shows how weak he is. Yeah. And it shows how ignorant he is and how unprepared he is and how he fails to plan and how he fails to look ahead. He's I'm not saying previous presidents were any good. I mean, the United States has never had a decent president, at least in my lifetime. That's definitely not been the case. I mean,
Mhm.
even Jimmy Carter, who's supposedly like the human rights guy, Jimmy Carter was the person who helped first, pushed us in the direction
Sure.
of creating ISIS, and then later on Al Qaeda in Afghanistan. Before the Soviets invaded, the plan was to his national security advisor Brzezinski presented a plan, and Carter approved of the plan to fund these what they called the Mujahideen, so that the Soviet Union would invade Afghanistan.
Right.
They
Right.
wanted the Soviet Union to invade. They wanted Afghanistan to be destroyed and tens of millions of lives destroyed, so that the Soviet Union would have their Vietnam. That is the good guy. That is the Jimmy Carter who later wrote a book about apartheid in Palestine and all that. That's the good
Mhm.
guy. So, that's American politics for you.